FIFA's worst nightmare just came from the underdogs. FIFA promised a bigger World Cup. More teams, more games, more countries, more stories. And for years, the debate around that promise was predictable. Critics said the tournament would be watered down. They said 48 teams would mean too many mismatches, too many one-sided scorelines, too many nights where the Giants treated the group stage like a warm-up session. Then the underdogs walked onto the pitch. Cape Verde stood in front of Spain and refused to move. New Zealand, the lowest-ranked team in the tournament, refused to disappear against Iran. Saudi Arabia frustrated Uruguay. Egypt took something from Belgium. Qatar had already made Switzerland uncomfortable. Bosnia and Herzegovina had already dragged Canada into a fight. Suddenly, the story FIFA thought it was selling, a bigger, happier, more global festival, became something sharper. Because this is the part nobody at the top of football can fully control. You can design the format. You can sell the hospitality packages. You can build the schedule, polish the graphics, and call it the greatest World Cup ever. But once the whistle blows, the smallest team on the pitch can still ruin the script. And that is FIFA's real nightmare. Not that the underdogs are bad, that they might be too good. The inciting moment came with one of those scorelines that look small until you understand what it means. Spain 0, Cape Verde 0. On paper, it should not have been the game that shook the tournament. Spain are one of the sport's superpowers, a nation with elite players, elite systems, and a football identity that has shaped the modern game. Cape Verde were making their World Cup debut, carrying the emotion of a small island nation onto one of the biggest stages in sport. But football has a way of exposing arrogance without saying a word. Spain had the name. Spain had the expectation. Spain had the global attention. Cape Verde had compact defending, discipline, courage, and a goalkeeper's kind of stubbornness running through the whole team. Every clearance became a statement. Every blocked shot became a reminder. Every minute that passed without Spain scoring made the stadium feel slightly different, as if the crowd could sense that something uncomfortable was happening to the tournament's hierarchy. And Cape Verde were not alone. On the same day, New Zealand drew 2-2 with Iran. Saudi Arabia drew 1-1 with Uruguay. Egypt drew 1-1 with Belgium. 4 matches, 4 draws, and suddenly the word upset was not attached to one miracle result. It became the atmosphere of the entire group stage. This was not one underdog having the night of its life. This was a pattern. That matters because the 2026 World Cup is not just another tournament. It is the first expanded 48-team World Cup, built around 12 groups of 4, a new round of 32, and a system where the top 2 teams in each group advance along with the 8 best third-place teams. FIFA's argument has always been that expansion gives more nations access to football's biggest stage. More representation, more dreams, more global reach. And in theory, that sounds beautiful. But the first institutional problem is hidden inside that same beauty. When you expand a tournament this much, you do not just invite more nations, you invite more chaos. You create more groups where one draw can scramble the table. You create more third-place calculations, more tiebreaker anxiety, more teams living in that strange space where 1 point feels like survival and 1 goal can reshape an entire bracket. FIFA wanted more stories. The underdogs gave them stories with teeth. The first response from the institution is not always a press conference or a defensive statement. Sometimes the response is the format itself. FIFA built a system that gives more teams a path, but that system now has to absorb the consequences of teams actually using that path. If Cape Verde can hold Spain, if New Zealand can take a point, if Saudi Arabia can frustrate Uruguay, then the old assumption collapses. The big teams are not simply passing through the group stage, they are being dragged into the mud. That is where the contrast becomes powerful. The institution sees expansion as architecture. The underdogs see it as opportunity. For FIFA, 48 teams means a bigger event. For a country like Cape Verde, it means a chance to tell the world it belongs. For New Zealand, it means refusing to be treated like a schedule filler. For Egypt, it means standing across from Belgium and saying, reputation does not defend set pieces, track runners, or survive pressure by itself. For Saudi Arabia, It means reminding everyone that the shock against Argentina in 2022 was not just a historical postcard. It was part of a larger truth. The gap in international football is not gone, but it is not as comfortable as it used to be. Think about what this actually means. The World Cup used to be sold through giants: Brazil, Argentina, Germany, Spain, France, England. The big flags, the big shirts, the big commercial machines. But the emotional power of the tournament has always lived somewhere else too. It lives in the team nobody expected to survive. It lives in the fans crying after a draw because a draw feels like history. It lives in players dropping to the grass after 90 minutes. Not because they won a trophy, but because they forced the world to look at them properly. That is what the underdogs have done here. They forced the world to look. And this is not isolated. The modern World Cup has been moving in this direction for years. In 1990, Cameroon beat Argentina and changed how the world looked at African football. In 2002, Senegal stunned France in the opening match and made the defending champions look suddenly mortal. In 2014, Costa Rica escaped a group with Uruguay, Italy, and England. Not by accident, but by organization and belief. In 2022, Morocco reached the semifinals and turned defensive discipline, transition speed, and emotional unity into one of the greatest tournament runs ever. Every era thinks its giants are safer than they are. Every World Cup eventually proves otherwise. What feels different in 2026 is the structure around the chaos. In the old 32-team format, a shock result was usually dramatic but contained. One group changed. One favorite panicked. One underdog dreamed. In this expanded format, underdog resistance can spread through the tournament like a chain reaction. A 0-0 draw does not just embarrass a favorite. It changes goal difference. It affects third-place rankings. It forces elite teams into must-win situations earlier than expected. It can even change which side of the bracket a giant falls into. That is why this is FIFA's nightmare and FIFA's victory at the same time. The expansion critics wanted proof that the tournament had become too soft. The underdogs are giving the opposite proof. They are showing that more teams does not automatically mean worse football, but they are also making the tournament harder to manage, harder to predict, and harder to package neatly. FIFA can celebrate global inclusion, but it cannot guarantee that inclusion will behave politely. The invited guests are not here to smile for the cameras. They are here to take points. There is a governance lesson hiding inside the football lesson. Institutions love controlled growth. They love expansion when expansion means more markets, more sponsors, more broadcasters, more ticket windows, more content. But sport is dangerous because the product has a mind of its own. A country that looks like a small brand on a spreadsheet can become a giant problem on the pitch. That phrase matters. A giant problem on the pitch. Cape Verde became a giant problem on the pitch. New Zealand became a giant problem on the pitch. Saudi Arabia and Egypt became giant problems on the pitch. Not because they broke rules, not because they created scandal, because they competed so seriously that the tournament had to reorganize its own assumptions around them. For the big teams, this changes the psychology of the group stage. You cannot treat the first match like a slow entry into the tournament anymore. You cannot assume that possession equals control. You cannot assume that a low block will eventually crack just because your badge is heavier. In an expanded World Cup, the underdog does not need to dominate you. It only needs to survive long enough to make your panic visible. And once panic becomes visible, everything changes. The crowd senses it. The players feel it. The favorite starts forcing passes. Fullbacks push too early. Midfielders take shots they would normally recycle. The underdog, meanwhile, grows taller with every minute. A tackle becomes louder. A goal kick takes on meaning. A throw-in near the corner flag feels like a small victory. This is how tournaments turn. Not always with a perfect goal, sometimes with resistance. For the smaller football nations, the stakes are enormous. A draw against a giant can change funding conversations back home. It can inspire a generation of kids who previously saw the World Cup as something other countries did. It can convince dual national players that there is a serious project worth joining. It can give domestic federations proof that investment matters. For FIFA, The stakes are more complicated. If the tournament becomes unpredictable, that is good television. If the group stage becomes chaotic, that is good drama. But if the format becomes too complicated, if third-place calculations confuse casual viewers, if favorites complain about conditions, scheduling, or competitive imbalance, then FIFA has to defend not just the results, but the machine that produced them. And that is where the viewer has to decide what kind of World Cup they actually want. Do you want a tournament where the biggest names are protected until the knockouts? Or do you want one where Spain can stare at Cape Verde in the final minutes and realize the badge will not score for them? Do you want clean brackets and predictable storylines? Or do you want the beautiful mess that only football can create? And when an underdog takes 1 point from a giant, is that a problem for FIFA? Or is that the whole reason the World Cup still matters? The closing image is not in a boardroom. It is not on a FIFA graphic. It is not in a corporate presentation about growth and global reach. It is on the pitch after the final whistle, where the favorite walks away irritated. The underdog stands still for half a second, and then the realization hits. They did not win the World Cup. They did not even win the match, but they changed the temperature of the tournament. And somewhere in the noise, somewhere between the flags, the camera flashes, the tired legs, and the fans who cannot quite believe what they have just seen, football gives FIFA the one thing it can never fully schedule: a story that refuses to obey. If you think this expanded World Cup is proving the critics wrong, say it in the comments. If you think the new format is creating chaos FIFA did not plan for, say that too. And if you want more football breakdowns that look past the scoreline and into the power games underneath, like the video, subscribe, and stay with us, because this tournament is only just beginning.